We are in chapter 12 and we are learning about the Renaissance and Reformation. And today we will learn about the Counter Reformation in section 3. Now go ahead, log into your Loda USD website, Clever and Cengage for your online book. Log in with your student account. And of course, for some of you, it will be helpful if you will use your textbooks. Again, it's in Unit 5, Chapter 12, Section 3. Lesson 3, the Counter Reformation, and it's in pages 348 to 349. This chapter's essential question is, how did new ways of thinking transform European culture? And for the lesson's objective is to describe how reforms and new religious order established during the Counter Reformation helped strengthen Catholicism. Reformation is a movement against the Catholic Church. So during the Counter Reformation, which is the defense of the Catholic Church, the Church made many changes in order to keep its members. Lesson 3.3, this particular lesson discusses some of these changes and describes how new religious order helped strengthen the Church. Now let's take a look at the introduction paragraph here. After Reformation, the Catholic Church was down but certainly not out. Millions of faithful followers remained loyal. They continued to recognize the Pope as their leader and trusted their priest's interpretation of the Bible. But the church officials knew that to keep their members and bring Protestants back to the fold, they had to stop the spread of Protestantism. To do that, they had to make some changes. And what are these changes? So the change that the Catholic made were part of a movement called the Catholic Reformation, sometimes also called as the Counter Reformation. In their use of words, to counter means to go against or to fight Protestantism. A meeting of church officials and scholars summoned by the Pope in 1545 was the key element of the movement. One of the first major action is to gather this what we call the Council of Trent. They met 26 sessions over 18 years and mostly in the northern Italian city of Trent. During this time, the council worked to define Catholic beliefs and practices and determine how the church needed to change. So this is the time when council members sought to clarify how Catholicism is different from Protestantism. For example, while Protestants believed that the Bible could be understood directly by individuals, the church thought that it must be interpreted and understood in light of tradition, that is, through its priests. Now, to make sure that the Catholics didn't stray from their faith, the Church also established the Roman Inquisition. Like the Spanish Inquisition discussed in the previous chapter, the Roman Inquisition used harsh methods, using torture and forced confession to punish heresy or the denial of the Church teachings. Well, obviously, Protestants were, of course, considered to be guilty of heresy, or they denied the teachings of the Church. In addition, the church officials created a list of books they objected to. Followers of Catholicism were forbidden to read books which included Bibles in the vernacular or the regular common language, as well as most anything written by Luther, Calvin, and Erasmus. So just in case you missed the teachings or the lesson for those names, those are key leaders for the Protestant movements. On the other hand, the church also applied gentler methods to broaden its appeal. It built new, larger churches to hold more worshipers, and in addition, priests sometimes delivered sermons in the vernacular or the language that is common to men. Now, FYI, during this time, priests conduct a mass or worship service in the language, the Latin language only. Now let's summarize the actions of the church before we move on to the next part of this lesson. What are the Counter-Reformation actions? The first one, they created the Council of Trent, and that is to establish the major teachings and distinctions of the Roman Catholic Church to the Protestants. And number two, they created this what we call Roman Inquisition, and this Roman Inquisition imposed harsh methods including torture and forced confession for those who are labeled heretics or those who deny the teachings of the church. Of course, they also use gentler approach by conducting masses in the language that is easily understood by a common members of the church. So in other words, it's not all bad. So there are gentler approach, reaching out to the poor, and missions and things like that. Now let's talk about a new religious order within the Catholic Church. Now, for you to better understand that in the Roman Catholic Church, there are these what we call orders. We have Franciscan orders, Dominican orders. So in simpler language, these are like groups of priests who follow a specific teachings that are within the major teachings of the Catholic Church. This new order within the Catholic Church is called the Society of Jesus, whose followers were known as Jesuits. A former Spanish knight named Ignatius of Loyola formed the order, and he insisted on strict obedience. So beginning in 1540, Ignatius commanded his followers as their superior general, and the Jesuits carried out their duties with great discipline. And they also took vows of poverty and obedience, promising to fight for the greater glory of God. So these are like the commandos of the Roman Catholic Church. So from the start, the Jesuits' purpose was to obey the Pope and to go wherever they thought they were most needed. In time, this meant establishing schools and universities throughout Europe and the world. Because of the discipline and hunger for knowledge of the Jesuits, they provided good education to thousands of men and inspired many to dedicate their lives to the church. The Jesuits also worked as missionaries by spreading Catholicism to people in Africa, Asia, and Americas. To prepare for this task, to enable them to communicate their faith to people in other parts of the world, the Jesuit priests studied many different languages. Through their support of the Counter Reformation, the Jesuits and other Catholic reformers helped revitalize the church. So by the end of 1500s, the church had regained much of its power, and the church was ready to play an important role in the coming century. Now let's go to the review and assess questions. As for the first one, for the reading check, what were some of the methods used during the Counter Reformation to stop the spread of Protestantism? What are the actions taken by the Catholic Church? Number 2, make inferences. Why do you think the church burned certain books? And number 3, draw conclusions. Why was it important for the church to establish its own schools and universities? So let me repeat, draw conclusions. Why was it important for the Catholic Church to establish its own schools and universities? Now go ahead, go to our Google Classroom and open the Review and Assess assignment, Chapter 12, Section 3. And we are doing Lesson 3 today, the Counter Reformation. And I want you to fill up all the basic information. Of course, the key vocabs here, the Council of Trent and heresy. Obviously, the title of the lesson that we just covered, which is very easy. And of course, the answers to the review and assess questions. And if you are aiming for the full credit, which I think you should, write in complete sentences.